She was the Duke's secret love, but she was promised to the Count. The moment Meg felt his hand brush against hers in the shadowed alcove of Ashford Hall, she knew her life would never be simple again. Because the man who made her heart race with nothing but a glance was the Duke of Henrique, powerful, untouchable, forbidden. And the man she was promised to marry, Count William Ashford, stood just beyond the velvet curtains, toasting to their upcoming union with a room full of aristocrats who believed love had no place in marriage. But love, as Meg would soon discover, does not ask for permission. It does not care about titles, promises, or duty. It only demands to be felt. If you love stories of forbidden romance, secret glances, and impossible choices set in the elegance of Regency England, subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. This is a story that will break your heart before it heals it. The ballroom at Ashford Hall glittered like a jewel box turned on its side. Chandeliers dripped with candlelight, casting liquid gold across the polished marble floors. The air smelled of beeswax, rosewater, and champagne, the scent of wealth, of expectation, of a future already written in ink that had yet to dry. Meg stood at the edge of the grand staircase, her gloved hand resting lightly on the banister. The empire waist gown she wore was the palest blush pink, almost white in the warm glow of the candles. The silk whispered against her skin with every breath, every slight movement. She felt exposed, displayed, like a portrait hung for appraisal. Below, the guests swirled in elegant chaos. Lords and ladies, viscounts and their wives, all dressed in their finest. Laughter bubbled up from clusters of conversation. The orchestra played a waltz that felt too cheerful, too light for the weight pressing against Meg's ribs. Her mother's voice cut through the haze. "Darling, you must smile." Meg turned. Lady Worthington stood beside her, impeccable in deep emerald silk, her expression a careful blend of pride and warning. "This is your night. The announcement of your engagement to Count William is the event of the season. You look like you're attending a funeral, not a celebration." Meg forced her lips into something resembling a smile. It felt brittle, thin, like it might crack if held too long. "There," her mother said, satisfied. "Much better. Now come, William is waiting." Her mother descended the stairs with the grace of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Meg followed, each step measured, controlled. Her heartbeat was a trapped bird fluttering against her throat. She swallowed it down. At the base of the stairs, Count William Ashford stood waiting. He was handsome in the way a painting was handsome, composed, symmetrical, pleasant to look at but lacking warmth. His coat was perfectly tailored in navy blue, his cravat tied with precision, his hair combed back in the latest fashion. He smiled as she approached, and it was the kind of smile that belonged in a drawing-room portrait. Polite, practiced, empty. "Miss Worthington," he said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles. His lips were cool. "You look exquisite tonight." "Thank you, my lord," Meg replied. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. William tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and turned to face the room. The orchestra quieted. Conversations faded. All eyes turned toward them. Lord Ashford, William's father, stepped forward with a crystal glass raised high. "Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, tonight we celebrate not only the finest company England has to offer, but also the joyous union of two great families. It is my honor to announce the engagement of my son, Count William Ashford, to Miss Margaret Worthington." Applause erupted. Champagne glasses clinked. Meg's smile stayed fixed in place, her jaw aching from the effort. Beside her, William inclined his head graciously, accepting the congratulations with the ease of someone born into expectation. And then, through the glittering crowd, Meg saw him. He stood at the far end of the ballroom, just inside the arched doorway, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. Duke Henrique de la Croix, tall, dark-haired, dressed in black from collar to boot, the only relief a silver cravat pin that caught the candlelight. He didn't smile, didn't applaud. He simply stood there, his gaze cutting through the room like a blade, and when his eyes found hers, the air left Meg's lungs in a single silent rush. The world tilted. She felt it, that pull, that gravity that had no name, no logic. It was the same pull she had felt 3 months ago at the Earl of Somerset's garden party when they had been introduced under the shade of an ancient oak tree. The same pull she had felt every time their paths had crossed since, at the theatre, at a charity auction, once in the rain outside a bookshop when neither of them had said a word, only stood beneath separate awnings and looked at each other, until the storm passed. William's voice broke the spell. "Ah, the Duke has arrived. How unexpected." There was something in his tone. Not quite jealousy, not quite suspicion, something sharper, colder. Meg's pulse hammered in her wrists, her neck behind her eyes. She forced herself to look away from Henrique, to focus on the champagne glass a passing servant offered her. She took it, held it, did not drink. "Excuse me for a moment," William said, his hand slipping from hers. "I must greet him, it would be rude not to." He walked away, leaving Meg standing alone at the center of the ballroom, surrounded by smiling strangers offering hollow congratulations she barely heard. Her gaze drifted back to the doorway. Henrique was watching her still. The ballroom became unbearable. Too bright, too loud, too full of people who looked at her and saw only a bride, a transaction, a piece in a game of titles and alliances. Meg excused herself with a murmured word about needing air, slipping through the crowd with practiced ease. She found refuge in the East Corridor, a quieter wing of Ashford Hall lined with tall windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. The music was softer here, distant, like something heard in a dream. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. "Running away from your own engagement ball?" The voice came from behind her, low and unmistakable. Meg's eyes snapped open. She turned. Henrique stood a few paces away, half hidden in the shadows of a velvet-draped alcove. His hands were clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. The candlelight from a nearby sconce carved sharp lines across his face, the angle of his jaw, the hollow beneath his cheekbone, the dark intensity of his eyes. "I needed a moment," Meg said quietly. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Her moment," he repeated, stepping closer. "From what, the applause, the champagne, or the man you're about to spend the rest of your life with?" The words landed like stones. Meg's throat tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." "This is my engagement party." "Exactly." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with everything they had never said, never allowed themselves to say. Henrique moved closer still, until he was standing just within reach, close enough that Meg could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tiredness around his eyes, the tension in the set of his shoulders. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, like a man who was fighting a war with himself. "Why did you come tonight?" Meg asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze held hers. "You know why." Her heart stumbled. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't say it. Don't make this harder than it already is." Henrique's jaw tightened. His hand lifted, just slightly, as if he meant to touch her face, to brush a stray curl behind her ear. But he stopped himself. His fingers curled into a fist at his side instead. "Do you love him?" he asked. The question was quiet, devastating. Meg's breath hitched. "That's not fair." "Answer me." "It doesn't matter." "It's the only thing that matters." She looked away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. "I'm promised to him, the contracts are signed, the announcement has been made. My family—" "Your family," Henrique interrupted, his voice rougher now, "will survive without selling you to a man who looks at you like you're a prize horse." Meg's head snapped back toward him. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." "I have a duty." "To hell with duty." The words hung in the air between them, raw and reckless. Meg felt something crack inside her chest, something she had been holding together with sheer will and good manners, and the belief that doing the right thing would somehow make the pain of it bearable. "I can't," she said, and her voice broke on the last word. "I can't do this, not here, not tonight." Henrique's expression softened, just barely. "Meg, please," she whispered, "don't make me choose. Not when I've already made the only choice I'm allowed to make." For a long moment he said nothing. He just looked at her, and in his eyes she saw everything he was holding back. The anger, the frustration, the longing that mirrored her own. But then slowly he stepped back. "I won't make you choose," he said quietly, "but I won't stand by and watch you marry him either." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor like smoke. Meg stood there alone, her hands trembling, her heart a shattered thing barely beating in her chest. Behind her the ballroom music swelled, and somewhere in the distance, Count William was calling her name. The invitation arrived 2 days later, delivered on cream-colored cardstock with William's family crest embossed in gold. Count William Ashford requests the pleasure of Miss Margaret Worthington's company for dinner at Ashford Hall. Friday evening, 7 o'clock. It was not a request, it was an expectation. Meg held the card between her fingers, staring at the elegant script until the letters blurred. Her mother had already accepted on her behalf, of course, already chosen the gown Meg would wear, a pale blue silk with cap sleeves and a modest neckline, already reminded her that this dinner was important, that William's family would be watching, assessing, ensuring their investment in the Worthington name was sound. That's what this was, an investment. Meg set the invitation on her writing desk and walked to the window. The garden stretched out before her, green and lush in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere beyond the hedge maze, beyond the stone walls of the estate, the world continued as it always had. People made choices, lived with them, moved forward. She wondered if any of them felt as trapped as she did. You deserve to be loved, Meg, not tolerated, not managed, loved. Henrique's words had been circling her mind for 2 days, relentless and inescapable. She heard them when she woke, when she tried to read, when she lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She heard them now. Meg pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes. In 2.5 weeks she would marry William. In 2.5 weeks the choice would be gone. Unless she made a different one first. Friday arrived with a sky the color of bruised plums, heavy with the threat of rain that never quite fell. Meg dressed in silence, while Mary fastened the buttons at her back, each one clicking into place like a lock. "You look lovely, miss," Mary said quietly. Meg stared at her reflection. The pale blue silk was elegant, appropriate, exactly what a future countess should wear to dinner with her betrothed. Her hair was pinned in soft curls, her gloves pristine white, her pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. She looked like someone else. "Thank you, Mary," Meg said. The carriage ride to Ashford Hall was 15 minutes of suffocating silence. Her mother sat across from her, reviewing last-minute reminders about posture and conversation topics and the importance of appearing gracious. Meg nodded at the appropriate moments, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her mind somewhere far away. Ashford Hall loomed ahead, its windows glowing gold against the darkening sky. The carriage rolled to a stop. A footman opened the door. Meg stepped out into the cool evening air and felt the walls close in. William was waiting in the entrance hall, dressed in a deep burgundy coat that made him look older, more severe. He smiled as she approached, taking her hand and pressing the obligatory kiss to her knuckles. "Miss Worthington," he said, "punctual as always, a virtue I greatly admire." Punctuality. Of all the things he could admire about her, he chose punctuality. "Thank you, my lord," Meg replied. He offered his arm, she took it. They were led into the dining room, a cavernous space with a table long enough to seat 20, though tonight it was set for only 6. William's parents sat at the head, his younger brother Edmund to the right, and an empty seat beside him that Meg assumed was meant for her mother. But her mother had remained in the drawing room with Lady Ashford, leaving Meg alone with the men. William pulled out a chair for her and she sat. The table stretched between them like a chasm. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Silver gleamed against white linen. Everything was perfect, polished, cold. "I trust the preparations for the wedding are proceeding smoothly?" Lord Ashford asked, his voice booming across the table. "Oh, yes, my lord," Meg said. "Madame Delacour has been most efficient." "Excellent, excellent. A well-organized affair reflects well on both families." William leaned back in his chair, swirling wine in his glass. "I've been reviewing the guest list. I believe we should invite Lord Pemberton and his wife. They have considerable influence in Parliament." "Of course," Meg said, "because what else could she say?" "And the honeymoon," William continued as if discussing a business transaction. "I've decided on Bath. 2 weeks should suffice. Any longer, and the estate will suffer from my absence." 2 weeks in Bath, with a man who spoke of their wedding night the way one might discuss crop rotations. Meg's throat tightened. She reached for her water glass and drank, the liquid doing nothing to ease the pressure building in her chest. Edmund, William's younger brother, leaned forward with a grin that bordered on mischievous. "I saw Duke Henrique at the club yesterday. He looked positively miserable. I heard he's leaving for Scotland next week." Meg's heart stopped. William's expression tightened, just barely. "Is that so?" "Yes, quite sudden, apparently. No one knows why." Edmund's gaze slid to Meg, curious and probing. You met him at your engagement ball, didn't you, Miss Worthington?" Every eye at the table turned to her. Meg set down her glass with careful precision. Briefly, he offered his congratulations. "How generous of him," William said, and there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "I've always found the Duke rather aloof," Lord Ashford said dismissively. "Brilliant, certainly, but too serious by half. Not the sort of man one invites to a cheerful gathering." The conversation moved on. They discussed politics, land management, the upcoming season. Meg smiled, nodded, said the appropriate things at the appropriate times. But inside she was screaming, "He's leaving for Scotland." The words echoed in her mind, drowning out everything else. Enrique was leaving in a week, and once he was gone, the rest of the thought was too terrible to finish. Dinner ended with port and polite conversation in the drawing room. Meg sat beside her mother on a velvet settee, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. She was very good at this, at pretending, at performing the role she'd been taught to play since childhood. But when William approached and asked if she would walk with him in the gardens, something inside her recoiled. "Of course," she said anyway. They stepped out into the cool night air, the scent of roses and damp earth surrounding them. The gardens at Ashford Hall were immaculate, every hedge trimmed with precision, every path perfectly laid. It was beautiful in the way a painting was beautiful, something to admire from a distance but never touch. William walked beside her in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. Finally he spoke. "There's something I need to address." Meg's pulse quickened. "Oh? I'm not a fool, Miss Worthington." His voice was calm, controlled. "I've noticed the way you look when Duke Enrique's name is mentioned, the way you avoid speaking of him, the way you seemed distracted at your fitting when he delivered that message." Meg's stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean." William stopped walking and turned to face her. "I am choosing to believe that nothing inappropriate has occurred between you, that you understand your duty to this engagement and to our families." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. "Of course I understand," Meg said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good." William's gaze was cold, assessing. "Because I will not be made a fool of. I will not have my name dragged through scandal by a wife who cannot control her sentiments." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Meg lifted her chin. "You have nothing to concern yourself with, my lord." "I hope not." He stepped closer, and Meg had to force herself not to retreat. "You are to be my wife, my countess. You will comport yourself with the dignity and discretion that title demands. Any association with Duke Enrique beyond what is socially necessary ends now." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Meg felt something inside her harden. "I have not been associating with him. See that it remains that way." William reached out and took her hand, not gently but firmly, possessively. "I am not a romantic man, Miss Worthington. I don't believe in fairy tales or grand passions, but I do believe in respect, in duty, in the sanctity of agreements made." His grip tightened just slightly, enough to make his point. "Do we understand each other?" he asked. Meg looked into his eyes and saw nothing there. No warmth, no affection, just cold, calculated ownership. "Yes," she whispered. "We understand each other." "Excellent." He released her hand and offered his arm once more. "Shall we return inside? I wouldn't want you to catch a chill." They walked back toward the house, and with every step Meg felt the walls closing in tighter and tighter until she could barely breathe. This was her future. This man, this life, this cage dressed in silk and pearls. And in 1 week, the only person who had ever truly seen her would be gone. The carriage ride home was silent. Meg stared out the window at the passing darkness, her mother's satisfied murmurs about the success of the evening fading into white noise. When they arrived at Worthington Manor, Meg excused herself immediately, claiming fatigue. She climbed the stairs to her room, closed the door, and leaned against it. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palms. "I will not be made a fool of." William's words echoed in her mind, cold and unyielding, and beneath them another voice, gentler, desperate. "You deserve to be loved." Meg crossed to her writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Her hand hovered over it, the quill trembling. She had a choice to make. She could marry William in 2 weeks and spend the rest of her life as a countess, respected, secure, utterly empty. Or she could run. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, impossible. But as Meg sat alone in her room with the weight of her future pressing down on her, she realized something. The impossible was starting to feel like the only option she could survive. She dipped her quill in ink and began to write. Your Grace. The words came slowly at first. Meg sat at her desk, the quill hovering over paper, ink threatening to drip and ruin the pristine white surface. Outside, the night had settled into that deep, heavy silence that comes just before dawn, when the world holds its breath and waits. Your Grace. Too formal, too distant. She crossed it out. Enrique. Her hand trembled as she wrote his name. Just his name, no title, no pretense. The intimacy of it felt like stepping off a cliff. I don't know how to write this letter. I've started it a dozen times, and each time the words feel inadequate, insufficient, but you're leaving in a week, and if I don't say this now, I never will. Tonight at dinner, William made it clear that I am to be his possession. Not his partner, not his equal, his possession. He spoke of me the way one speaks of an estate acquisition or a piece of furniture meant to complement a room. And I realized something. I have spent my entire life being what other people needed me to be. The dutiful daughter, the obedient bride, the perfect ornament for someone else's life. I have smiled when I wanted to scream. I have nodded when I wanted to run. I have swallowed every desire, every dream, every piece of myself that didn't fit into the shape they wanted me to take. But I cannot do it anymore. Meg's vision blurred. She blinked hard, willing the tears back. You asked me if I felt this thing between us that has no name. I told you I did. But I didn't tell you the whole truth. The truth is that you terrify me, not because of who you are, but because of what you make me feel. When I'm near you, I forget every rule I've ever learned, every lesson in propriety and duty and sacrifice. When you look at me, I feel seen in a way I've never been seen before. And it's terrifying because I didn't know I could want something this much. I didn't know I could want anything this much. You said I was choosing fear over happiness. You were right. But I'm also choosing fear over destroying my family, over ruining my sister's future, over becoming the scandal that follows the Worthington name for generations. So I'm asking you something I have no right to ask. Wait for me. Not forever. I know that's not fair. But wait until I can find a way to do this without burning everything to the ground. Give me time to think, to plan, to find a way that doesn't make me choose between loving you and loving them. If such a way exists. If it doesn't... She stopped, stared at the unfinished sentence. If it didn't exist, what then? Meg set down the quill and pressed her hands against her eyes, exhausted. The clock on the mantel chimed 4 in the morning. In 3 hours the house would wake. Mary would bring tea, her mother would review the day's schedule, and Meg would put on another performance of perfect smiling compliance. She picked up the quill again. If it doesn't exist, I will find you in Scotland. I will come to you. And I will trust that love, this impossible, terrifying, beautiful thing, will be enough to carry us through whatever comes after. Yours? Meg? She folded the letter before she could second-guess herself, sealed it with wax, addressed it in careful script to Henrique's London residence, and then she hid it in the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath old correspondence and pressed flowers. Because sending it and writing it were 2 different acts of courage, and she wasn't sure she had both in her yet. Morning came with pale grey light and the sound of rain against the windows. Meg had slept for perhaps an hour, her dreams fractured and restless. When Mary knocked, she was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Good morning, miss," Mary said, setting down the tea tray. "Your mother wishes to remind you about the luncheon at Lady Pemberton's at noon." Another performance, another stage. "Thank you, Mary." The maid hesitated at the door. "Miss Meg, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but you look unwell. Shall I tell your mother you need rest?" The kindness in her voice nearly undid Meg completely. "No," Meg said quietly, "I'll be fine." Mary didn't look convinced, but she nodded and left. Meg rose from bed and crossed to her desk. She pulled open the bottom drawer and stared at the sealed letter. "Send it," a voice whispered in her mind. "Send it now before you lose your nerve." Her hand reached for it. A sharp knock at the door made her slam the drawer shut. "Meg?" Her mother's voice crisp and impatient. "Are you awake?" "Yes, Mother." Lady Worthington entered without waiting for invitation, already dressed for the day in dove-grey silk. Her gaze swept over Meg with clinical assessment. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep well." "Then you should have retired earlier instead of sitting up writing letters." Her mother's eyes landed on the desk, on the fresh ink stains, the scattered papers. Who were you writing to at such an hour? Meg's heart hammered. Just correspondence, thank you notes for the engagement gifts. It was a believable lie, a safe lie. Lady Worthington's expression softened fractionally. You're being very conscientious, that's good. But you must pace yourself, darling. The wedding is in less than 2 weeks, and you need to look your best. Of course. Her mother crossed to the wardrobe and began sorting through gowns. Wear the rose-colored muslin today. Lady Pemberton appreciates elegance, and there will be several influential women present. This is an opportunity to establish yourself before the wedding. An opportunity to be inspected, evaluated, approved. Yes, Mother. Lady Worthington paused, her hand on a gown, and turned to look at Meg with surprising gentleness. I know this is difficult. The transition from daughter to wife is never easy, but I promise you, once you're settled into married life, once you have children and a household to manage, you'll find purpose in it. Contentment even. Contentment. Not happiness, not love, contentment. Did you? Meg asked quietly. Did you find contentment? Her mother's expression shuttered. I found what I needed to find, and so will you. She left the room, taking the rose muslin with her. Meg stood alone in the growing morning light, the letter burning like a brand in the drawer behind her. The luncheon at Lady Pemberton's was exactly what Meg had expected. 12 women seated around a table, laden with delicate pastries and finger sandwiches, their conversations a carefully choreographed dance of gossip and status. Meg sat between her mother and the Viscountess of Hartley, smiling at the appropriate moments, laughing politely at stories she barely heard. And when is the happy day? Lady Pemberton asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. 2 weeks from Saturday, Lady Worthington answered for Meg. The ceremony will be at St. George's. How wonderful. Count William is such a catch. You must be thrilled, Miss Worthington. Meg's smile didn't waver. I'm very fortunate. And will you be attending the Harrington Ball next week? The Viscountess asked. I understand it's to be quite the event. We received an invitation, Lady Worthington said. Though with the wedding so close, I'm not certain. Oh, you must attend, Lady Pemberton insisted. It may be your last opportunity to enjoy society as an unmarried woman. Once you're a countess, everything changes. Everything changes. The words echoed in Meg's mind as the luncheon continued around her. She sipped tea she couldn't taste, nibbled at pastries that felt like sawdust, nodded and smiled, and played her part with practiced perfection. And all the while she thought about the letter hidden in her desk. The letter she still hadn't sent. It was nearly 4 o'clock when they returned to Worthington Manor. Meg excused herself immediately, claiming a headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. The pressure behind her eyes had been building all day, a steady, throbbing ache. She climbed the stairs to her room, closed the door, and leaned against it. The letter was still there, still sealed, still unsent. Meg crossed to the desk and pulled it out, staring at Henrique's name written in her own careful hand. If she sent this, there was no taking it back, no pretending. No more hiding behind duty and propriety and fear. If she sent this, she was choosing him. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, unfolded the paper and read her own words again. Wait for me. I will find you in Scotland. Yours, Meg. The courage she'd had at 4 in the morning felt impossibly distant now, in the cold light of afternoon, with the weight of her mother's expectations and William's warnings pressing down on her. She should burn it, forget she ever wrote it. Go forward with the wedding and learn to live with whatever contentment she could scrape together from the ruins of her dreams. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Meg stared at the letter for a long moment. Then she resealed it with fresh wax, rang for Mary and placed it in her maid's hands before she could change her mind. I need this delivered to Duke Henrique's London residence, Meg said quietly. Immediately, and Mary. She met the maid's eyes. No one can know. Mary's gaze was knowing, worried but loyal. Yes, miss. She disappeared with the letter, and Meg stood alone in her room, her heart racing, her hands empty. She had chosen. Now all she could do was wait for his response, and pray she hadn't just destroyed everything. 2 days passed in agonizing silence. Meg moved through them like a ghost, performing her duties with mechanical precision. She attended another fitting, approved flower arrangements, sat through a tedious tea with William's aunt, who spoke at length about the responsibilities of being a countess. She smiled, nodded, said all the right things. But inside she was unraveling. Every time a servant entered a room, her heart leapt. Every knock at the door sent electricity through her veins. Every footstep in the hall made her breath catch. But no response came. Perhaps he hadn't received the letter. Perhaps Mary had been intercepted. Perhaps Henrique had read it and decided she wasn't worth the risk, the scandal, the impossibility of it all. Perhaps he had already left for Scotland. The thought made Meg's chest constrict so tightly she could barely breathe. On the third day she woke to rain. Heavy, relentless rain that turned the world grey and made the manor feel smaller, more suffocating. Meg stood at her bedroom window, watching water stream down the glass, distorting the gardens beyond into abstract shapes. A knock at the door. "Come in," Meg said without turning. Mary entered, and there was something different in her step, something urgent. "Miss Meg," her voice was low, careful. "There's someone here to see you." Meg's heart stopped. She turned slowly. "Who?" "I didn't give his name, but he's waiting in the east garden near the fountain. He asked that you come alone." The world tilted. Meg crossed to Mary and gripped her hands. "Did anyone see him arrive?" "No, miss, he came through the back gate. But your mother is in the drawing room, and if she looks out the window, tell her I've gone to the library, that I'm not to be disturbed." Mary nodded, her expression tight with worry. "Be careful." Meg grabbed a shawl and slipped out through the servants' entrance, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The rain soaked through the thin fabric almost immediately, cold and sharp against her skin, but she barely felt it. She ran through the gardens, past the hedge maze, past the rose beds heavy with rain-battered petals, toward the fountain at the far edge of the estate, where the manicured lawns gave way to wilderness. And there, standing in the rain with water dripping from his dark hair and his coat soaked through, was Henrique. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like he'd ridden straight through the storm to get here, like he was holding himself together through sheer force of will. Meg stopped 10 paces away, breathless, trembling. For a moment they just looked at each other. Then Henrique pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his coat, her letter. Damp at the edges, but still legible. "I received this yesterday," he said, his voice rough. "I've read it 20 times, memorized every word, and I need to know." He took a step closer. "Did you mean it?" Meg's throat closed. "Every word!" Something broke in his expression. Relief, anguish, desperate, bone-deep need. "Then why are you still here?" The question came out almost angry. "Why are you still planning a wedding to a man you don't love when you could be—" He stopped, shook his head. "I don't understand, Meg. You wrote that you would come to me, that you would choose this, choose us, but you're still here and the wedding is in 11 days, and I'm losing my mind trying to figure out what you want from me." "I want time," Meg said, her voice breaking. "I want to find a way that doesn't destroy my family." "There is no way." Henrique closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "There's no version of this where you leave William and your family emerges unscathed. The scandal will happen. Society will talk. Your mother will be furious, and your father humiliated, and your sister's prospects will suffer. That is the price. The only question is whether you're willing to pay it." Rain poured down between them, soaking them both, blurring the edges of the world until there was nothing but this moment, this choice, this man standing before her, asking her to burn her life down for the chance at something real. "I'm terrified," Meg whispered. "So am I. What if we're wrong? What if this—" She gestured between them, helpless. "What if this isn't enough? What if I give up everything and we realize we were just 2 people caught up in something that felt bigger than it was?" Henrique's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Look at me."
She did.
"I have never been more certain of anything in my life," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I know what I'm asking of you. I know it's unfair and reckless and selfish, but I also know that I will spend the rest of my life loving you, whether you marry him or not. Whether you come with me or stay, that is the truth, the only truth that matters." A sob caught in Meg's throat. "But I cannot watch you marry him," Henrique continued. "I cannot stand in that church and watch you promise yourself to a man who will never deserve you. So I'm leaving tomorrow, for Scotland, and I'm asking you—" His forehead pressed against hers. "Come with me." "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow night. There's a coaching inn on the North Road, 3 miles past the village. Be there at midnight. I'll have a carriage waiting. We can be across the border before anyone realizes you're gone." "Henrique." "I know what I'm asking," he said again. "I know it's impossible. But impossible things happen, Meg. People choose love over duty. They choose happiness over approval." They choose to live instead of merely existing. His hands framed her face, and the tenderness in his touch was almost unbearable. "Choose to live," he whispered. "Choose me." Meg's hands came up to grip his wrists, holding him there, holding this moment like something fragile and sacred. Rain ran down their faces, mingling with the tears she couldn't hold back anymore. "If I do this," she said, her voice shaking, "there's no going back." "I know. My family will never forgive me. I know. I'll lose everything." "No." Henrique's eyes bore into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You'll lose the life you were expected to live, but you'll gain the one you were meant for." The words settled over her like a benediction. Meg closed her eyes, feeling the rain, the cold, the warmth of his hands against her skin, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her from all sides. Tomorrow night. Midnight. An impossible, terrifying, beautiful leap into the unknown. When she opened her eyes, Henrique was watching her with something that looked like hope and heartbreak tangled together. "I need to think," she said quietly. Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. "I'll be at the inn, midnight tomorrow. If you don't come," his voice roughened, "if you don't come, I'll know your answer, and I won't ask again." "Henrique." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Soft, reverent, a goodbye that felt too much like an ending. Then he stepped back, and the loss of his warmth was devastating. "Midnight," he said again, and then he turned and walked away through the rain, disappearing into the grey morning like a dream she wasn't sure she'd been brave enough to hold on to. Meg stood alone by the fountain, soaked through and shaking, her whole world balanced on the edge of a knife. Tomorrow night. She had until tomorrow night to decide. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Meg changed into dry clothes, told her mother she'd gotten caught in the rain on a walk, and endured a lecture about catching cold before the wedding. She sat through lunch, reviewed seating charts, listened to her father discuss the marriage settlement with the same tone he used for business contracts. And all the while the clock ticked steadily toward midnight. That evening, Meg stood in her room as Mary helped her undress, the silence between them heavy with unspoken things. "Mary," Meg said quietly, "if someone had to choose between duty and happiness, what would you tell them to choose?" Mary's hands stilled on the buttons of Meg's gown. "That's not a question I can answer for you, miss." "But if you could." The maid was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "My mother used to say that duty keeps you alive, but happiness makes you want to live. I never understood the difference until I watched you these past weeks." Meg turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Mary met her eyes with gentle honesty. "You're alive, miss. You do everything you're supposed to do, but I haven't seen you truly live since the day they announced your engagement." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward. Meg looked away, blinking hard. "Thank you, Mary." The maid finished with the buttons and helped Meg into her nightgown. At the door she paused. "Whatever you decide, miss, I hope you find a way to breathe again." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Meg crossed to the window and looked out at the darkness. The rain had stopped, leaving the world clean and quiet. Stars pierced the clearing sky. Somewhere out there, 3 miles past the village, was an inn, and a man who had offered her the world. Meg opened the drawer of her desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She lit a candle, dipped her quill in ink, and began to write. Not to Henrique this time, to her mother. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I know you will never understand. I know you will be angry, humiliated, devastated by what I've done. I know this choice will bring scandal upon our family, and for that, I am truly sorry. But I cannot marry Count William. I have tried to convince myself that duty is enough, that respect and security and a respectable match are worth sacrificing every dream, every desire, every piece of myself that doesn't fit into the shape of the life you planned for me. But they're not. I would rather live in scandal and poverty with someone who sees me, truly sees me, than spend the rest of my life as an ornament in a loveless marriage. I know you did what you thought was best. I know you raised me to value family, reputation, duty above all else, and I do value those things. But I also value myself, my happiness, my right to choose the life I want to live, not the one I'm expected to live. Please forgive me. Not now, I know that's impossible, but someday, when the anger has faded and the scandal has passed, forgive me for being selfish enough to choose love. Tell Father I'm sorry. Tell Caroline I hope she will be braver than I was, and make her own choices when the time comes. and know that I love you, even as I break your heart. Your daughter, Margaret. Meg set down the quill and stared at the letter. Her hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. In its place was a strange, crystalline clarity. She was going to do this. She was going to run. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent panic racing through her veins, but instead she felt something else, something that felt dangerously close to peace. Meg folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it carefully. She wrote her mother's name across the front and set it on the center of her desk, where it would be found in the morning. Then she turned to her wardrobe. She couldn't take much. A trunk would be too obvious, too difficult to transport without being noticed. She pulled out a small leather traveling bag, the kind ladies used for short visits, and began to pack. 2 dresses, simple ones without excessive lace or embroidery, a nightgown, a shawl, her mother's silver hairbrush, the one piece of sentimentality she couldn't leave behind, the small music box her father had given her on her 16th birthday, a book of poetry she'd read 100 times, and at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a handkerchief, the pearl necklace her grandmother had left her, not for sentiment this time, but for practicality. If things went badly, if Henrique's promises fell through, she would need something to sell. The thought was cold, calculating, but Meg was done being naive. She was choosing love, yes, but she was also choosing survival. She changed into a traveling dress, deep forest green, practical and unremarkable, pulled her hair into a simple braid, took one last look around the room that had been hers since childhood. The 4-poster bed where she'd dreamed 1,000 dreams, the window seat where she'd read on rainy afternoons, the desk where she'd written letters and practiced her penmanship and composed the words that would change everything. This was the last time she would see this room as Margaret Worthington, dutiful daughter. When she returned, if she returned, she would be someone else entirely. Meg picked up her bag, took a breath and opened the door. The house was quiet, dark. The servants had retired for the evening, and her parents were in their separate chambers. The grandfather clock in the hall showed 11:30, 30 minutes until midnight. Meg moved through the corridors like a shadow, every creak of the floorboards making her heart jump, down the stairs, through the drawing room, toward the servants' entrance at the back of the house. She had almost reached it when a voice stopped her cold. "Going somewhere?" Meg froze. Slowly she turned. Her younger sister Caroline stood at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in a white nightgown, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She was 14, all wide eyes and sharp intelligence, and she was looking at Meg with an expression that was far too knowing. "Caroline," Meg breathed, "what are you doing awake?" "I heard you moving around." Caroline descended the last few steps, her gaze dropping to the traveling bag in Meg's hand. "You're leaving, aren't you? You're running away." There was no point in lying. "Yes," Meg said quietly. Caroline was silent for a long moment. Then softly, "Is it because of him, the Duke?" Meg's throat tightened. "How did you—" "I'm not blind, Meg. I saw the way you looked at each other at the engagement ball, the way you disappeared into the corridor and came back looking like someone had torn your heart out." Caroline stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Does he love you?" "Yes." "Do you love him?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you do this sooner?" The question, so simple and devastating, nearly broke Meg completely. "Because I was afraid," she whispered, "of hurting mother and father, of ruining your future, of being selfish." Caroline reached out and took Meg's free hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're not selfish, you're brave." Tears blurred Meg's vision. "Caroline." "Go," her sister said fiercely. "Go now before you lose your nerve, and don't worry about me. I'll be fine. I'll tell them I knew nothing." "You'll be questioned. Mother will be angry at you, not me." Caroline smiled, sad and wise beyond her years. "And when the scandal passes and they start looking for a husband for me, I'll remember this moment. I'll remember that you chose to be happy, and I'll find the courage to do the same." Meg pulled her sister into a tight embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and childhood. "I love you." "I love you too." Caroline pulled back, her eyes shining. "Now go before I start crying and wake the whole house." Meg kissed her sister's forehead, grabbed her bag and slipped out into the night. The air was cool and crisp, the sky clear and full of stars. Meg moved quickly through the gardens, past the fountain where she'd stood with Henrique just that morning, through the back gate, and onto the narrow path that led toward the village. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but her feet kept moving, carrying her forward step by step. 3 miles to the inn. 3 miles to a new life. The path was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through the trees. Meg walked quickly, her eyes adjusting to the shadows, her ears straining for any sound of pursuit. But the night was silent, except for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin. Ahead she could see the warm glow of lanterns. The coaching inn sat at a crossroads, its windows lit, smoke curling from the chimney. And in front a black carriage waited. Meg's breath caught. She approached slowly, her legs trembling, half convinced this was a dream and she would wake up back in her bed at Worthington Manor. The carriage door opened. Henrique stepped out. He was dressed for travel in a long black coat and boots, his hair disheveled, his face etched with tension. When he saw her, when he realized she had actually come, the relief that washed over his features was so profound it stole her breath. "Meg," he breathed. She dropped her bag and ran to him. He caught her in his arms, pulling her against his chest so tightly she could barely breathe. His hand cupped the back of her head, his face buried in her hair. "You came," he whispered. "God, I didn't know if you would. I hoped, but I didn't know." "I'm here," Meg said against his shoulder. "I'm here. I chose you." Henrique pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. His eyes were bright with emotion, relief and joy, and something that looked dangerously close to tears. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Once we leave, there's no going back. Your family will disown you. Society will shun you. You'll lose everything you've ever known." "I know. And you're still choosing this, choosing me." Meg looked up at him, at the man who had offered her the world and asked for nothing but the truth in return. The man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her anyway. "I'm not choosing you over my family," she said quietly. "I'm choosing myself, my happiness, my right to live a life that's mine, and yes, that life includes you." Something broke in Henrique's expression. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he whispered. "I know." For a moment, they stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, the weight of what they'd chosen settling over them like a cloak. Then Henrique pulled back, his expression turning practical. "We need to go now, before someone comes looking for you." He picked up her bag and helped her into the carriage. The interior was simple but comfortable, with cushioned seats and heavy curtains that could be drawn for privacy. Henrique climbed in after her and knocked on the ceiling. The carriage lurched forward. Meg looked out the window as Worthington Manor disappeared into the distance, taking with it everything she had been and leaving only the uncertain, terrifying, exhilarating possibility of what she might become. Henrique's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Where are we going?" Meg asked quietly. "North," Henrique said. "To Scotland first. We'll marry there. It's easier, no bans or permissions required. Then to my estate in the Highlands. It's remote, quiet. No one will bother us there." "And after?" "After we figure it out together." "Together." The word felt like a promise, a beginning. Meg leaned against Henrique's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. Outside, the world rushed past in shadows and moonlight, carrying them toward a future that was utterly unknown. And for the first time in her life, Meg wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was ready to live in it. The first light of dawn found them 30 miles north of Worthington Manor, the carriage rattling along rough country roads that wound through fields and forests. Meg had dozed fitfully against Henrique's shoulder, waking every time the wheels hit a rut or the horse's pace changed. Now, as pale gold light spilled across the horizon, she sat up and looked out the window at a world she'd never seen before. Small villages passed by, smoke rising from cottage chimneys. Farmers were already in their fields, beginning the day's work. The landscape was wilder here, less manicured than the estates she knew. It was beautiful. "How are you feeling?" Henrique asked quietly. Meg turned to look at him. He hadn't slept at all, she realized. He'd sat awake through the entire night, watching over her, one hand resting protectively on hers. "Terrified," she admitted, "and free both at once." Henrique's expression softened. "That sounds about right. Do you think they've discovered I'm gone yet?" He glanced out the window, calculating. "Your mother likely expected you at breakfast, so yes, they know by now." The thought sent a chill through Meg's chest. She imagined her mother opening the bedroom door, finding the empty bed, the letter on the desk, the initial confusion giving way to shock, then fury. She imagined her father's face, the disappointment, the cold, quiet rage. "William will come after me," Meg said suddenly. "He won't let this stand, the humiliation." "Let him come," Enrique said, his voice hard. "You're not his property, you never were. The law might disagree, the contracts are meaningless if you refuse to honor them." Enrique's hand tightened on hers. "And I won't let anyone force you into anything. Not him. Not your father. Not anyone." The carriage slowed, then stopped. Enrique tensed immediately, his hand moving to the pistol tucked into his coat. "Stay here." He climbed out, and Meg heard him speaking in low tones with the driver. A moment later he returned, his expression grim. "There's a rider approaching from the south, moving fast." Meg's heart dropped into her stomach. "Already?" Trade could be nothing. A messenger, someone on legitimate business. But Enrique didn't look convinced. He leaned out the window, his eyes scanning the road behind them. Meg joined him, peering through the early morning mist. A single horseman was visible in the distance, riding hard, his dark coat billowing behind him. As he drew closer, Meg's blood ran cold. "It's William," she whispered. Enrique's jaw clenched. "Get back from the window." "No." Meg's voice was steady now, hard. "If he's come all this way, he's come for me. I won't hide." The rider pulled up alongside the carriage, his horse breathing hard, foam flecking its mouth. Count William Ashford sat in the saddle, his face a mask of cold fury. His coat was travel-stained, his cravat askew. He looked like he'd ridden through the night without stopping. "Miss Worthington," he said, his voice clipped and dangerous, "step out of the carriage." "No," Meg said through the window. William's eyes narrowed. "This is not a request. You are betrothed to me, you have broken your contract, dishonored your family, and committed an act of unconscionable—" "I have chosen my own life," Meg interrupted, her voice ringing clear. "Something you made abundantly clear I would never be allowed to do as your wife. You don't know what you're doing. He seduced you, filled your head with romantic nonsense." "He's done nothing but offer me the truth," Meg said, "which is more than you ever did." William's horse sidestepped, agitated. "Your father has given me permission to retrieve you, by force if necessary." Enrique opened the carriage door and stepped out, placing himself between William and Meg. "Touch her and it will be the last thing you do." The two men faced each other in the pale morning light, the tension so thick it was almost visible. "This doesn't concern you, Delacroix," William said coldly. "It concerns me entirely. She's mine now. She's contracted to me." "She's a human being," Enrique said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not a piece of property to be bought and sold. And she's made her choice. A choice she'll regret." William's gaze cut to Meg. "When the scandal breaks, when your family is ruined, when your sister can't find a decent match because of what you've done, you'll regret this, and he jerked his chin toward Enrique. "He'll grow bored of you within a year. Men like him always do." The words were designed to wound, to plant seeds of doubt. But Meg climbed out of the carriage and stood beside Enrique, her chin lifted, her voice unwavering. "Perhaps I will regret it," she said. "Perhaps everything you're saying is true, but it will be my regret, my choice, my life, and I would rather live with the consequences of my own decisions than die slowly in a marriage that was never mine to begin with." William's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's mine to make." For a long moment, the three of them stood in the road, the morning sun climbing higher, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Then William reached into his coat. Enrique moved instantly, his hand going to his pistol, but William pulled out a folded document instead. He threw it to the ground at Meg's feet. "The contract," he said bitterly. "Nullified. I won't bind myself to a woman foolish enough to throw away everything for a fantasy." He yanked his horse's reins, preparing to turn. "William," Meg said quietly. He paused, not looking at her. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for leaving, but for the embarrassment, the inconvenience. You deserved better than a bride who couldn't love you." William's shoulders were rigid. "I never asked for love." "But I was still expecting respect," he hissed, and for a split second the sharp pain of a man whose pride was crushed flashed in his eyes. "Your pity is no substitute, Miss Worthington." For a heartbeat she thought he might say something else, something human, vulnerable, real. But he simply spurred his horse and rode away, disappearing back down the road toward everything Meg had left behind. She watched him go, feeling the weight of it settle over her, the finality, the bridge burning behind her. Henrique picked up the document from the ground, scanning it quickly. "He's released you from the contract. It's legal, witnessed." He looked at her, something like awe in his eyes. "You're free." Free? The word felt too big, too impossible. Meg looked down at her hands. They were shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sheer enormity of what had just happened. She had done it. She had actually done it. Henrique's arms came around her, pulling her close. "Are you all right?" Meg pressed her face against his chest and laughed, a wild, slightly hysterical sound. "I don't know, ask me in a year." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, we should keep moving. Your father might be more persistent." They climbed back into the carriage, and the journey continued north. The miles passed in a blur of countryside and small towns, each one taking them farther from Meg's old life and closer to whatever came next. They stopped only to change horses, eating simple meals at roadside inns where no one knew their names or cared about their story. By the time night fell again, they had crossed into Scotland. "We'll stop here," Henrique said as the carriage pulled up to a small inn in a village whose name Meg didn't catch. "Rest for a few hours. In the morning, we'll find a minister." A minister. A wedding. The reality of it hit Meg all at once. Tomorrow she would become Henrique's wife, not in a grand ceremony at St. George's with 300 guests and her mother crying tears of pride, but in a small Scottish church with strangers as witnesses. And somehow that felt more real than anything she'd left behind. The innkeeper showed them to a room, just one, though Henrique had requested two. "Only one available, Your Grace," the man said apologetically, "but it's clean and the bed's comfortable." Henrique looked at Meg, a question in his eyes. She nodded. The innkeeper left and they were alone. The room was simple. A large bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a single window overlooking the darkened street. Nothing like the luxury Meg was accustomed to. It was perfect. Henrique set down their bags and turned to face her, suddenly uncertain. "I can sleep in the chair or ask if there's another room." "No," Meg said quietly. "Stay." He crossed to her slowly, his hands coming up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. "I want you to know that I don't expect—" He stopped, searching for words. "We don't have to— I can wait until after we're married, until you're ready." Meg looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything for her, who had waited while she made impossible choices, who had promised her the world and asked for nothing but the truth. "I'm ready," she whispered. Enrique's breath hitched. "Meg!" She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. Then his arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that stole her breath and made her heart race and felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Enrique rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I will love you until the day I die and probably long after." Meg's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too." Outside, the Scottish night wrapped around the little inn, full of stars and possibility. And inside, two people who had chosen each other over everything else began to build a life from the ashes of the ones they'd left behind. Morning came with soft grey light and the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. Meg woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, the unfamiliar room taking shape around her, the patchwork quilt, the rough wooden beams across the ceiling, the warmth beside her. She turned her head. Henrique was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning." Meg's voice was rough with sleep. She became acutely aware of how close they were, how her hair was probably a disaster, how she must look in the pale morning light. But Henrique was looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "How long have you been awake?" she asked. "A while. I didn't want to wake you." His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture achingly gentle. "You talk in your sleep." Heat flooded Meg's cheeks. "I do not." "You do. You said something about roses and rain and my name." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Twice." Meg buried her face in the pillow, mortified. "I'm never sleeping again." Henrique's laugh was low and warm. "That would be unfortunate. I quite like watching you sleep." She peeked up at him. "That's slightly unsettling." "Is it?" He traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips, his touch feather-light. "I'll try to be more unsettling then." Despite everything, the uncertainty, the fear, the enormity of what they'd done, Meg found herself smiling. Actually smiling. The kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and genuine, and hadn't been practiced in front of a mirror. "What happens today?" she asked quietly. Henrique's expression grew more serious. "Today we find a minister. Make this official." He paused. "If you still want to." "Do you think I've changed my mind overnight?" "I think you've had time to truly consider what you've given up, and I would understand if—" Meg pressed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. "I haven't changed my mind. I won't change my mind. Stop giving me chances to run." His eyes searched hers. "I just need you to be certain." "I am? Even though there's no going back?" "Especially because there's no going back." Something shifted in Henrique's expression. Relief, love, gratitude, all tangled together. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, then her wrist, then the inside of her elbow, each touch deliberate and reverent. "Then let's get married," he whispered against her skin. They dressed in the simple traveling clothes they'd worn the day before. Meg tried to do something presentable with her hair, but without Mary's help, she managed only a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. No elaborate curls, no pearl pins, no veil of expensive tulle. She looked nothing like the bride she was supposed to have been. She looked like herself. The village had a small stone church at its center, old and weathered, with ivy climbing the walls and a modest bell tower. The minister was a kind-faced man in his 60s who asked no questions when Henrique explained they wished to be married that morning. "You'll need witnesses," the minister said, "2 at minimum." Henrique nodded. "I'll find someone." He stepped outside and Meg was left alone in the quiet church. She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting the pews in colors of amber and blue and deep crimson. This was where she would marry. Not St. George's with its soaring ceilings and aristocratic congregation. Not with her mother crying in the front row and 300 guests watching. Not with William standing stiff and formal at the altar, waiting to claim his prize. Here, in this small Scottish church that smelled of wood polish and old hymn books, with a man who loved her enough to risk everything. The door opened behind her. Henrique entered with 2 people, an elderly couple, the innkeeper and his wife, both smiling warmly. "They've agreed to witness," Henrique said. "Are you ready?" Meg looked at him standing there in his travel-worn coat, his dark hair disheveled, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The ceremony was brief, simple. Nothing like the elaborate ritual Meg had been preparing for over the past weeks. The minister spoke of love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Meg barely heard the words. She was too focused on Henrique's hands holding hers, warm and steady. Too focused on the way he was looking at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Do you, Henrique Delacroix, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was clear, unwavering. "And do you, Margaret Worthington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Meg's throat tightened. This was it, the final step, the point of absolute no return. She looked into Henrique's eyes and saw her entire future there. "I do," she said. "Then by the power vested in me I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Henrique's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to close the distance or pull away. Meg rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and sweet and tasted like promises and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The innkeeper's wife was crying happy tears. Her husband clapped Henrique on the shoulder. The minister beamed. And just like that, Meg was married. Not to Count William Ashford. To the man she loved. They signed the register in the minister's small office, Meg's hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name for the last time, as Margaret Worthington. Below it, in fresh ink that hadn't yet dried, Henrique had written, Henrique Delacroix, Duke of Lennox. And beside it, space for her new name, Margaret Delacroix, Duchess of Lennox. Meg stared at the words. They looked foreign, impossible. They looked like freedom. The innkeeper insisted on hosting a small celebration. Nothing elaborate, just bread and cheese and wine in the inn's common room. Other guests joined in, raising toasts to the newlyweds, offering congratulations in thick Scottish accents Meg could barely understand, but appreciated nonetheless. It was nothing like the reception that was supposed to happen at Worthington Manor. No orchestra, no champagne fountains, no elaborate multi-course meal. It was perfect. As the afternoon wore on, Henrique leaned close to Meg and whispered, "Should we continue north to the estate?" Meg nodded. "Yes, I want to see it, our home." Our home. The word still felt surreal. They departed the inn to warm farewells, the innkeeper's wife pressing a small package of food into Meg's hands for the journey. The carriage rolled north through the Scottish countryside, the landscape growing wilder and more beautiful with each passing mile. Hills rose in the distance covered in purple heather. Lochs gleamed like mirrors beneath the sky. Ancient forests crowded the roads, their branches forming canopies overhead. Meg had never seen anything like it. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her face pressed to the window. "Wait until you see the estate," Henrique said. "It's remote, isolated, not fashionable in the slightest, but it's peaceful." "It sounds perfect." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the carriage turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense forest. After what felt like miles, the trees gave way to open land. And there, silhouetted against the evening sky, was Lennox Hall. It wasn't grand like Ashford Hall or elegant like Worthington Manor. It was a fortress, built of grey stone with turrets at the corners and narrow windows designed more for defence than aesthetics. Ivy climbed the walls. The grounds were wild, more forest than garden. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, like a place where time moved differently, like a sanctuary. "It's not much," Henrique said quietly, "compared to what you're used to." "It's perfect," Meg interrupted, "absolutely perfect." The carriage stopped before the entrance. Henrique helped Meg down and she stood looking up at the imposing structure, feeling something settle in her chest. This was home now. The servants who greeted them were few but warm. A housekeeper named Mrs. MacLeod, who looked stern until she smiled, a butler named Fraser, who was clearly devoted to Henrique, and a handful of maids and footmen who welcomed their new duchess with genuine kindness. "We've prepared the duchess's chambers," Mrs. MacLeod said, leading them inside. "Though if your graces prefer to share—" "We'll share," Henrique said, his hand finding Meg's. Mrs. MacLeod nodded approvingly. The interior of Lennox Hall was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings with exposed beams, tapestries covering stone walls, fireplaces large enough to stand in. It was medieval and beautiful and utterly unlike anything Meg had known. She loved it immediately. The Duchess's chambers, their chambers now, were in the east wing, a suite of rooms that included a large bedroom, a sitting area, and a private study. A fire had already been lit in the hearth, casting warm light across the space. "Dinner will be ready within the hour," Mrs. MacLeod said, "unless your graces require more time." "An hour is perfect, thank you," Henrique said. The servants departed, leaving them alone. Meg walked to the window and looked out at the darkening landscape. The forest stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional glimmer of a loch catching the last light. She heard Henrique move behind her, felt his presence before he touched her. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Meg turned to face him. "I keep waiting to feel regret, panic, some sign that I've made a terrible mistake." "And?" "Nothing, I feel—" She searched for the right word. "Light. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot what it felt like to be without it." Henrique's arms came around her, and she leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I meant what I said this morning," he murmured against her hair. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "You don't have to earn my choice," Meg said. "I made it freely." "I know, but I want to anyway." They stood there as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, holding each other in the quiet of their new home. And for the first time in her life, Meg felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 weeks passed in the Scottish Highlands, like a dream suspended outside of time. Meg woke each morning to mist rolling across the moors, to the cry of birds she couldn't name, to Henrique's arms wrapped around her and his breathing slow and steady against her neck. She learned the rhythms of Lennox Hall, the way the stone floors were cold in the early morning, the way the fire in the great hall crackled and popped when the wind blew from the north, the way the entire estate felt alive in a way Worthington Manor never had. She learned the names of the servants, helped Mrs. MacLeod plan menus, even though she had no idea what half the Scottish dishes were. Walked through the wild gardens with Henrique, their fingers intertwined, talking about everything and nothing. She learned what it meant to be married to someone who actually wanted to know her thoughts, her opinions, her dreams. She learned what it felt like to be happy. But happiness, Meg was discovering, did not erase the past. It simply made it easier to carry. She thought about her family every day, about her mother's face when she read the letter, about her father's disappointment, about Caroline, who had been so brave in letting her go, now facing the consequences alone. And some mornings, when the guilt became too heavy, Meg would slip out of bed before dawn and walk to the highest point of the estate, a rocky outcropping that overlooked the forest and the loch beyond, and let herself cry. Henrique always found her there. He never asked questions, never demanded explanations. He simply sat beside her in the cold morning air and held her hand until the tears stopped and she was ready to go back inside. On the morning of their 4th week at Lennox Hall, Meg was sitting at the small writing desk in their chambers when Henrique entered, carrying a letter. His expression was carefully neutral, but Meg knew him well enough now to see the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked. He held out the letter. "It's from your sister." Meg's heart stopped. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope, staring at Caroline's familiar handwriting. For a moment she couldn't bring herself to open it. "Do you want me to leave?" Henrique asked gently. "No, stay." She broke the seal and unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the words quickly. "Dearest Meg, I hope this letter finds you well, though I have no idea if it will even reach you. I had to bribe one of Father's footmen to discover where the Duke's estate was located, and I'm trusting that he was honest about the information. First, I need you to know that I'm all right. Mother was furious, of course. Father locked himself in his study for 2 days. There has been talk, so much talk, but it's already starting to fade. The scandal is not as catastrophic as Mother predicted, though she would never admit that. Count William has left for the continent. He told anyone who would listen that you suffered from a nervous condition, and he graciously released you from the engagement rather than force you into marriage. It's a lie, obviously, but one that saves his pride and gives our family a shred of respectability. Mother has forbidden anyone from speaking your name in her presence. Father is quieter about it, but I can see the hurt in his eyes. They feel betrayed, Meg. They may feel that way for a long time, but I don't. I think you are the bravest person I've ever known, and watching you choose yourself over duty has changed something in me. I don't know what my future holds, but I know it will be mine to choose. You gave me that gift. So wherever you are, whatever life you're building with the Duke, I hope you're happy. I hope you're free. I hope you wake up every morning and know that you made the right choice. Write to me if you can. Even if it's years from now, I'll be waiting. All my love. Caroline. P.S. Mother found the music box in your room, the one Father gave you. She cried when she held it. I thought you should know. Meg's hands shook as she lowered the letter. Tears blurred her vision, spilling down her cheeks in hot, silent streams. Henrique was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. What did she say? She said... Meg's voice broke. She said I was brave. He held her while she cried. For her mother who would never forgive her. For her father who couldn't understand. For the music box left behind. For the sister who would face her own battles alone now. For all the pieces of her old life that were gone forever, and the new one she was still learning to inhabit. When the tears finally subsided, Meg pulled back and wiped her eyes. I need to write to her. She needs to know I'm all right. Of course. Meg pulled out fresh paper and began to write, her hand steady despite the emotions churning inside her. Dearest Caroline, your letter found me, and it brought me more comfort than you could possibly know. I am well, more than well. I am happy in a way I didn't know was possible. The Duke, Henrique, is everything I didn't dare hope for. He is kind and patient, and sees me in a way no one ever has. We have a home here in Scotland that is wild and beautiful and utterly unlike anything I knew before. I won't lie and say I don't feel guilt. I think about Mother and Father every day, about the pain I caused, about the scandal and the whispers and the damage to our family's name. There are mornings when the weight of it is almost too much to bear. But then I remember what my life would have been if I'd stayed, and I know with every fiber of my being that I made the right choice. Tell Mother I'm sorry, not for leaving but for the pain it caused her. Tell Father I hope someday he can understand. Tell them both that I love them, even if they can never love me again. And Caroline, be brave when your time comes. Don't let anyone tell you that duty is more important than happiness. Don't settle for contentment when you deserve joy. Choose yourself. Always choose yourself. I will write to you as often as I can, and perhaps someday when enough time has passed you can visit. I would love for you to see this place, to meet Henrique, to understand why I ran. Until then, know that I think of you always. Your sister, Meg. She sealed the letter and gave it to Fraser to post. Then she stood at the window looking out at the grey morning, feeling the complicated tangle of grief and relief that came with closure that wasn't quite closure. Henrique came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, knowing what it cost. Meg leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had become her anchor. "No," she said, "not for a moment." That afternoon, a storm rolled in from the north, the kind of wild, howling tempest that seemed to shake the very foundations of Lenox Hall. Rain lashed against the windows, wind screamed through the turrets, the servants moved through the halls, lighting extra candles and stoking fires. Meg and Henrique retreated to the library, a circular room in one of the towers with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive fireplace. They sat together on the worn leather sofa, Meg tucked against Henrique's side, a blanket draped over them both. "Tell me about when you were young," Meg said. "Before the title, before all of this." Henrique was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing absent patterns on her arm. "My father died when I was 12. Heart gave out suddenly. One day he was there, teaching me about estate management and responsibility. The next day, he was gone. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." His voice was distant, remembering, "but it changed everything. I became the Duke overnight, had to learn how to run an estate, manage tenants, navigate society. There was no time to grieve, just responsibility." Meg tilted her head to look up at him. "Is that why you understood about duty?" "Partly, but also—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I watched my mother spend the rest of her life mourning what she'd lost. She remarried eventually, to a man she didn't love, because society expected it, because women weren't supposed to live alone. And I watched her become this hollow version of herself, going through the motions of life without ever really living." His arms tightened around Meg. "When I met you, I saw that same hollowness starting. You were learning how to disappear inside your own life, and I couldn't stand it." Meg's throat tightened. "You saved me." "No." Henrique pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved yourself. I just offered you a place to run to." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside, the fire crackling in the hearth, the quiet safety of the moment. "What happens now?" Meg asked eventually. "What do you mean?" "We can't hide here forever. Eventually we'll have to return to London, face society, deal with—" "We don't have to do anything," Henrique interrupted gently. "We can stay here as long as you want. Years if necessary. Let the scandal die down completely before we show our faces. But you have responsibilities. Parliament, the estates, your position. Can all wait." He shifted so he could look at her properly. "Meg, I didn't bring you here to trap you in another cage. If you want to stay in Scotland for the rest of our lives, we'll stay. If you want to travel to France or Italy or anywhere else in the world, we'll go. If someday you want to return to London and rebuild your place in society, we'll do that too." He cupped her face in his hands. "The only thing that matters is that you're happy. Everything else is negotiable." Meg's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming reality of being truly, completely loved. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "I just know I want to be here with you." "Then that's enough." He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promises that needed no words. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Lenox Hall, wrapped in each other's arms with the fire burning warm and the world held safely at bay, Meg felt something she'd been searching for her entire life. Peace. The weeks turned into months. Spring came to the Highlands, transforming the wild landscape into something almost impossibly beautiful. Heather bloomed purple across the moors, wildflowers dotted the meadows, the loch reflected perfect blue skies. Meg learned to ride the estate's horses, sturdy Highland ponies that were nothing like the delicate mares she'd ridden in England. She learned to walk for miles without getting lost, learned the names of plants and birds, learned what it felt like to live in her body instead of constantly performing for others. She and Henrique fell into rhythms. Mornings spent walking the grounds, afternoons in the library or the garden, evenings by the fire, talking or reading or simply existing in comfortable silence. And at night, in the privacy of their chambers, they learned each other in ways that made Meg understand why poets wrote about love as though it were holy. Letters arrived periodically from Caroline, full of news from home. The scandal had indeed faded. William had married a French heiress and seemed content with his decision. Father had softened slightly, though he still wouldn't speak Meg's name. Mother remained as rigid as ever. But Caroline was thriving. She had refused 2 marriage proposals already, telling their parents she wouldn't settle for anything less than what Meg had found. "You've made me impossible to satisfy," she wrote in one letter. "I keep comparing every potential suitor to how Henrique looks at you in my imagination. They all fall short." Meg smiled when she read it, feeling the complicated mix of pride and guilt that came with knowing she'd changed her sister's life, for better and worse. One morning in late spring, Meg woke to find Henrique already dressed, standing at the window with a letter in his hand. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. He turned, his expression unreadable. "It's from the Prince Regent, an invitation to return to London for the season, a reconciliation of sorts." Meg's heart skipped. "They want us back?" "They want me back. He hesitated. "You would be tolerated for my sake. It wouldn't be easy, but—" "Do you want to go?" Meg asked. Henrique crossed to the bed and sat beside her, taking her hands. "I want whatever you want." "That's not an answer." He smiled slightly. "I miss parts of it. The work in Parliament, seeing old friends, being useful in ways that go beyond managing an estate." His thumbs rubbed circles on her palms. "But not if it means putting you through hell." Meg thought about it, about returning to London society as the woman who'd jilted Count William Ashford, about the whispers, the cut direct from certain ladies, the constant judgment. But she also thought about living her entire life in hiding, about Henrique sacrificing his work, his purpose, his position, because she was too afraid to face the consequences of her choice. "Let's go," she said quietly. Henrique's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think it's time." She squeezed his hands. "I can't hide forever, and if we're going to build a real life together, it can't be one where we're constantly running from the past." "It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is." Henrique pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "We'll do it together, every step." "Together," Meg echoed. And as spring sunlight streamed through the windows of Lennox Hall, illuminating the life they'd built from the ashes of the ones they'd left behind, Meg felt ready. Not fearless, not certain, but ready to face whatever came next. Together. London in the summer was exactly as Meg remembered it. Crowded, noisy, smelling of smoke and horses, and the Thames at low tide. But returning after 6 months in the Scottish Highlands made it feel like a different world entirely. Smaller somehow, despite the sprawling streets. More confined even with all the open sky. The carriage rolled through the city toward Henrique's London residence, a townhouse in Mayfair that Meg had never seen. She watched the familiar landmarks pass by through the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Henrique covered her hands with his. "We can turn around right now, go back to Scotland and never look back." Meg shook her head. "No, we're here, we're doing this." "You're trembling." "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but I'm also tired of being afraid." The townhouse was elegant and surprisingly warm for a London residence, all dark wood and comfortable furnishings rather than the cold formality she'd expected. The staff greeted them with genuine warmth, especially toward Henrique, and cautious politeness toward Meg. She was the scandalous Duchess now, the woman who'd run away from her wedding. They would reserve judgment until they knew her better. "The Prince Regent's ball is in 3 days," Henrique said as they settled into the drawing room. "That will be our formal re-entry into society. It will be intense." "Will William be there?" "Almost certainly. He's back from the continent with his new wife." Henrique's jaw tightened. "If he says anything—" "He won't," Meg said with more confidence than she felt. "He has as much reason to avoid scandal as we do." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Meg met with a modiste who somehow managed not to show any judgment as she fitted the notorious runaway bride for a ball gown. She practiced walking into rooms with her head held high, practiced smiling when she wanted to hide, practiced being the Duchess of Lennox instead of the disgraced Margaret Worthington. The night of the ball arrived too quickly. Meg stood in front of the mirror in her new gown, deep sapphire blue silk that made her eyes look impossibly bright. Her hair was dressed in elegant curls, a simple diamond necklace at her throat. She looked every inch a duchess. She felt like an imposter. Henrique appeared in the doorway, devastatingly handsome in black evening wear. He stopped when he saw her, something crossing his face that made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. "I'm terrified." He crossed to her and took both her hands. "Listen to me. These people, their opinions, their judgments, their whispers, they don't define you. They don't determine your worth. You are the woman who had the courage to choose her own life. That makes you stronger than any of them will ever be." Meg's eyes filled with tears. "Don't make me cry. I'll ruin the cosmetics." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Shall we?" The Prince Regent's ball was held at Carlton House, and it was every bit as overwhelming as Meg had feared. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and jewels. Hundreds of guests swirled in elegant chaos, the cream of London society, all dressed in their finest, all turning to stare as the Duke and Duchess of Lennox were announced. The whispers started immediately. "That's her. The one who ran away. With the Duke, can you imagine? Shameful. Romantic. Scandalous." Meg's hand tightened on Henrique's arm. He covered it with his own, steady and warm. "Breathe," he murmured, "just breathe." They descended the stairs into the ballroom, and Meg kept her chin up, her expression serene, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The Prince Regent himself approached, a large man with an even larger personality. "Delacroix, good to have you back. And this must be the infamous Duchess." Meg curtsied perfectly. "Your Highness." He studied her with shrewd eyes. "Caused quite the stir, didn't you?" "I apologize for any inconvenience to your Highness." "Inconvenience?" He laughed, a booming sound. "My dear, you provided the most entertaining gossip of the season. I should thank you." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, Ashford was always a bore. You did yourself a favor." With that shocking pronouncement, he moved on, leaving Meg slightly stunned. "Did the Prince Regent just approve of me?" she whispered to Henrique. "Apparently." He looked bemused. "That will make things significantly easier." But not easy. As they moved through the ballroom, the reactions were mixed. Some people greeted them warmly. Old friends of Henrique's who were willing to overlook scandal for loyalty. Others turned away with cold shoulders and disapproving glares. A few brave souls approached Meg directly, curiosity outweighing propriety. "Is it true you rode through the night to Scotland?" one young lady asked, eyes wide. "It is," Meg said. "How wonderfully romantic." Not everyone was so charmed. Lady Pemberton, who had hosted that luncheon months ago, approached with ice in her eyes. "Duchess, how's unexpected to see you here?" "Lady Pemberton," Meg kept her voice level, "I hope you're well. I would be better if society maintained some standards of decency." Her gaze raked over Meg with disdain. "Breaking contracts, abandoning family, running off with—" She glanced at Henrique. "Well, some might call it romantic. I call it selfish." The words stung because part of Meg still believed them. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "And some might call it brave." Meg turned. Her sister Caroline stood there, dressed in pale pink, looking older than her 15 years, and beside her, looking stern and uncomfortable but present nonetheless, was their father. Meg's world tilted. "Caroline," she breathed. "Father." Lord Worthington looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then stiffly he nodded. "Margaret. Or should I say, Your Grace." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Caroline swept forward and took Meg's hand, squeezing tightly. "I told them they were coming to this ball whether they liked it or not. Mother refused, of course, but Father agreed to at least see you." Tears burned in Meg's eyes. "Thank you." Her father cleared his throat. "You look well." "I am well, Father, very well." Another long pause, then quietly, "Are you happy?" The question caught Meg off guard. She glanced at Henrique, who was watching her with such love and pride it made her chest ache. "Yes," she said, "truly happy." Lord Worthington's expression softened just slightly. "Then perhaps—" he struggled with the words, "perhaps you made the right choice after all." It wasn't a blessing. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was more than Meg had dared hope for. "Thank you, Father," she whispered. Lady Pemberton made an indignant noise and swept away. Caroline grinned triumphantly. The evening continued, and slowly Meg began to breathe easier. Yes, there were stares, yes, there were whispers, but there were also people who smiled at her genuinely, who congratulated Henrique on his marriage, who treated her like a person rather than a scandal. And when Count William appeared across the ballroom with a pretty Frenchwoman on his arm, he simply nodded to Henrique and moved on. No confrontation, no scene, just mutual acknowledgement that the past was past. As the night wore on, Henrique led Meg onto the dance floor. The orchestra played a waltz and they moved together with practiced ease, the rest of the ballroom fading away. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Like I can finally breathe," Meg said. "Not easily, not perfectly, but enough. That's all we need, enough." She looked up at him, this man who had waited for her, who had offered her everything and asked for nothing but the truth. "I love you." "I love you too," he spun her gently. "And I'm proud of you for being here, for facing this. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The waltz ended, but they stayed on the dance floor for another and another, until the candles burned low and the crowd thinned, and it was time to go home. As their carriage rolled through the London streets toward the townhouse, Meg leaned against Henrique's shoulder, exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in months. "That wasn't as terrible as I feared," she said. No, it was difficult, uncomfortable, but survivable." She tilted her head to look at him. "What happens now?" "Now?" Henrique considered. "We build a life. Here in Scotland, wherever we want. We navigate society on our own terms. We make mistakes and fix them. We argue and make up. We grow old together." "That sounds perfect. It won't always be easy." "I don't need easy anymore," Meg said. "I just need real." He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. And as the carriage carried them home through the London night, Meg thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, standing at the top of the stairs at Ashford Hall in a wedding gown, about to promise herself to a man she didn't love. That girl had been so afraid, so trapped, so convinced that duty was the only path. But she'd found courage, she'd chosen love, she'd chosen herself. And in doing so, she'd become someone she was actually proud to be. The Duchess of Lennox. Not because of a title, but because she'd fought for the right to choose her own life and won. 1 year later, the gardens at Lennox Hall had been transformed. What was once wild and untamed had been gently coaxed into something beautiful, still natural, still free, but with paths winding through the heather and benches placed strategically for viewing the loch. It was Meg's project, her way of putting her mark on the estate without trying to control it. She sat on one of those benches now, a book in her lap that she wasn't really reading, watching the late afternoon sun paint the water gold. Footsteps on the gravel path. She looked up. Caroline approached, smiling. Older now at 16 and breathtakingly lovely. She'd been visiting for the summer, escaping the pressures of London and their mother's increasingly desperate attempts to marry her off. "There you are," Caroline said. "Mrs. MacLeod wants to know if you're coming in for tea." "In a moment." Meg patted the bench beside her. "Sit with me." Caroline settled next to her sister, both of them looking out at the view. "I love it here," she said quietly. "It's so peaceful." "It is." "Do you ever miss London, society, all of it?" Meg considered the question. "Sometimes I miss certain people, certain freedoms, but I don't miss the performance, the constant need to be perfect." She glanced at her sister. "Here, I can just be myself. Mother says you've been ruined by isolation, that you've become too independent." "She would." Meg smiled without bitterness. "How is she?" "Unhappy, but she's always unhappy." Caroline hesitou. "Ela nunca reconheceu a carta que você deixou, Meg. Ela disse a papai que era traição e que seria queimada." Caroline pegou fio em seu vestido. "Mas o papai, ele pergunta sobre você, com mais frequência agora." "Does he?" "Yes, I think he's starting to understand. Not forgive, maybe, but understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds, the wind, the distant sound of the loch lapping at the shore. "Meg," Caroline said eventually, "when I'm ready to make my own choice, will you help me even if it's scandalous?" Meg took her sister's hand. "Especially if it's scandalous." Caroline grinned. The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Henrique rode into view, returning from inspecting the northern fields. He dismounted near the bench, his face lighting up when he saw Meg. That look still made her heart skip. She wondered if it always would. "Ladies," he said, bowing theatrically, "am I interrupting?" "Always," Meg said, but she was smiling. "Good, I'd hate to break the habit." He offered Meg his hand. "Walk with me?" She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. To Caroline she said, "Tell Mrs. McLeod we'll be in for tea shortly." "Take your time," Caroline said knowingly. They walked through the gardens together, Meg's hand tucked into Henrique's arm. Their steps matched perfectly after a year of learning each other's rhythms. "I have news," Henrique said. "Oh?" "Your father sent a letter. He's asked if we might visit Worthington Manor for Christmas." Meg stopped walking. "He did?" "Yes, he says—" Henrique pulled the letter from his pocket and read, "It has been too long since this family was whole. I would like to attempt to remedy that, if you are willing." Meg's eyes filled with tears. "He wants us to come home." "Not home," Henrique corrected gently. "Lennox Hall is your home now, but yes, he wants to see you to try to rebuild what was broken. What do you think?" "I think it's your choice, as always." Meg looked back toward the house, their sanctuary, their life built from nothing but courage and love. Then she thought about Worthington Manor, about the family she'd left behind, about the possibility of healing. "Let's go," she said. "For Christmas, let's try." Henrique pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Together?" "Always together." They continued walking as the sun set over the highlands, painting the world in shades of rose and gold. And Meg realized that this moment, this life, this choice she'd made, was exactly what happiness felt like. Not perfect, not easy, not without pain or regret or complicated truths, but real. Beautifully, impossibly, wonderfully real. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end.
I learned to smile on command, to call sacrifice grace. But every night I felt invisible in this gilded perfect place.
I was born into a name, into duty carved in stone. Every choice already written, every crown await alone.
They said a duke must never fall, never choose, never plead. But the moment that I saw you, I forgot what they decreed.
I was promised, I was claimed by a future I didn't choose.
And I watched you from the shadows, knowing I had all to lose. If loving you is reckless, let the world call it a crime. I'd rather burn in truth with you than live a lie in time.
Where duty ends and love begins, that's where my heart still stands. I don't need crowns or certainty, just your trembling hand. They said fear is just a virtue, wearing patience like a veil. But I was slowly disappearing in a life that never felt real.
And when you said my name that night, like it mattered, like it meant, I realized the life of duty isn't how my soul was meant.
I would have waited in the dark, let you marry, let you go. But loving you in silence was a death I couldn't own.
So I offered you no promises, no safety, no disguise, only truth and open roads, and a life behind their lies.
I was terrified to run, of the cost, the blame, the scar.
I was terrified to stay and watch you fade where you are.
If loving you is reckless, let the heavens hear my plea. I'll trade the world they planned for me days of goodbye, something true survives.
If loving you is everything, then everything I'll give. I choose the fight.